Scene: a suburban driveway. A pristine white sedan is parked, blocking a large, ornate gate. The camera is low, looking up at the car. A man, Alex, stares at it, a single bead of sweat on his brow. The sound of a rumbling engine begins to grow, ominous and slow. A woman, Veronica, stands by her car, a smirk on her face. Veronica, you think you're so smart, don't you? Go on. Call the cops. See what they do. The camera pans up, a giant crane arm swinging into view over the house, casting a long shadow. The hook, a massive, gleaming piece of metal, descends slowly towards the car. Alex, his voice calm, chilling, I didn't call the cops. Cut to a fast, tight shot of the crane operator's hand pulling a lever. The sound of the winch ratcheting intensifies. Cut back to Veronica's face, the smirk gone, replaced by a dawning, frantic horror. Veronica, no. Wait. The crane hook clinks against the roof of her car. The screen goes black. The day started like any other, drenched in the indifferent heat of a California summer. The sun beat down on Alex's meticulously manicured lawn and the pristine blue water of his in-ground pool, which shimmered like a forgotten jewel. His day, however, was about to take a turn for the worse. A slow-motion collision course set in motion by a white Mercedes C-Class and a woman named Veronica. She was new to the neighborhood, a recent transplant from what she had haughtily described as somewhere with better taste. Alex had tried to be a good neighbor. He'd brought over a welcome basket with a bottle of a nice rose, a gesture that had been met with a vacant stare and a mumbled, "I don't drink that." From that moment on, a cold war had begun. The first skirmish was the overflowing recycling bin, the second, her refusal to prune the unruly bougainvillea that was strangling his fence. But the third, the one that had been escalating for 2 weeks now, was the parking. The gate was the main issue. It wasn't just any gate, it was a custom-built, heavy wrought iron masterpiece that protected his backyard from the street and, more importantly, led to the single access point for his pool service and any major deliveries. It was meant to be a symbol of his privacy and his little slice of paradise. For Veronica, it was apparently just an inconvenience. The first time it happened, a Thursday afternoon, he found her car parked directly in front of the gate, blocking it completely. Alex, a man who prided himself on his patience and diplomacy, left a polite note under her windshield wiper. "Hi! Your car is a bit far over and is blocking my gate. Would you mind pulling forward a few feet? Thanks." When he came back an hour later, the note was crumpled on the ground. The car was still there. The next day, a Friday, he tried a different approach. He knocked on her door. It took several minutes for her to answer, her hair a mess, a phone pressed to her ear. She held up a finger, a universal sign for "wait," and continued her loud, one-sided conversation about the merits of a new juice cleanse. When she finally hung up, she looked at him with an expression that said, "What do you want?" "Hi, Veronica," Alex began, trying to keep his tone even. "I just wanted to mention that your car is blocking my pool gate again." She didn't apologize. She didn't even pretend to be concerned. Instead, she let out a sigh that was laced with theatrical annoyance. "Oh, that old thing. I'm just popping in to grab something. I'll move it eventually. It's been there for a day and a half, Veronica. My pool guy can't get in." She shrugged. "Well, he's just going to have to wait, isn't he? It's a free country." With that, she closed the door in his face. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of contempt. Over the weekend, he'd managed to squeeze by, but it was a hassle. He found himself fantasizing about pushing the car into the street, letting the city tow it away. But he was a rational man. He had a career in project management, where he solved problems with logic and reason, not brute force. Monday morning, the real crisis hit. The new deck furniture was scheduled for delivery. It was a massive sectional, too big to be carried through the house. The delivery truck needed direct access through the gate. Alex had cleared his schedule, ready to oversee the installation. He walked outside at 8 a.m. The Mercedes was still there, a gleaming, white middle finger to his property. His phone rang. It was the delivery driver. "Mr. Hayes? I'm outside your house, but I can't get in. There's a car blocking your gate." Alex took a deep breath. "I'm so sorry. The neighbor's car. Just give me a few minutes, I'll have it moved." He strode over to her house and pounded on the door. No answer. He pounded again, harder. Nothing. He could hear music playing faintly from inside, a jazzy tune with a persistent saxophone wail. He rang the doorbell, a long, angry chime. Still nothing. The music died. The splash was not a polite plunk. It was a violent, geyser-like eruption of water that towered over the surrounding patio furniture. It was a roar of displaced liquid, a guttural shriek of metal and glass meeting an unyielding embrace. The surface of the pool, once a pristine, crystalline blue, instantly became a chaotic maelstrom of white foam and angry waves. A wave of chlorinated water, thick with the smell of pool chemicals, washed over Alex's sandals and slicked the stone patio. For a moment, all was silent except for the gurgle of the submerged car. Veronica's shriek, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock, hung in the humid air like a fading echo. Her face was a mask of disbelief. Her jaw hung open, her eyes wide, staring at the white roof of her Mercedes as it sank slowly into the deep end, the final bubbles of trapped air escaping its mangled frame. You monster!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Alex. You just destroyed my car!" Alex, in turn, was speechless. The absurdity of the situation had finally hit him. He had paid $10,000 to drop a car into his own pool. It was a monument to his frustration and his rage, a ridiculous, aquatic tomb for a brand new sedan. Gus, the crane operator, was already beginning to retract the crane arm, a small, knowing grin on his weathered face. He looked at Alex as if to say, "The job's done, boss. Now the real fun begins." And he was right, because the next sound that cut through the thick, chlorine-scented air was a new kind of siren, the wail of a police cruiser. Two squad cars pulled up to the curb a moment later, their flashing lights strobing through the shadows of the palm trees. They had likely been called by a panicked neighbor who had witnessed the bizarre spectacle of a crane lowering a car into a pool. Two officers stepped out. One was a tall, stern-faced woman with a braid tucked under her hat. The other was a younger man, his face a mixture of confusion and morbid curiosity. They walked slowly, their hands on their belts, their eyes fixed on the scene. They saw the crane truck, the shattered section of the driveway where the heavy stabilizers had settled, and the car. The submerged car. The deep end. "Someone care to explain to me what in the hell is going on here?" the female officer asked, her voice low and even, the kind of tone that precedes a storm. Veronica, tears now streaming down her face, broke first. "He did it! He dropped my car in his pool! It was my car! My brand new car!" She was frantic, her words jumbled, her gestures wild. The officer looked at Alex, then at the car, then back at Alex. "Is that your car, sir?" "No, officer, that's her car," Alex said calmly, pointing to Veronica. "She parked it over my gate, blocking the entrance to my property." "So you had it dropped in your pool?" the young officer asked, a note of disbelief in his voice. "I had it moved," Alex corrected, "by a licensed and bonded professional service. The owner was asked multiple times to move it and refused." The police department told me it was a civil matter and that I had to handle it myself. He held up the waiver Gus had made him sign. The company's contract says they are not responsible for damages to the vehicle or my property. This was the first time Veronica stopped her wailing. The police were listening to Alex, not to her. She looked at the paper in his hand. Her eyes narrowed. He's lying! He destroyed my property on purpose. You parked on his property without his permission, ma'am, the female officer said. That's trespassing. He had a legal right to have the vehicle removed. But not like this. Veronica screamed. This is insane! No one just drops a car in a pool. The older officer sighed. It's certainly not standard procedure, but the law states that he had the right to get your vehicle off his property. It's a civil issue now. You can sue him for the value of the car. You want me to sue him? What about all of this? Veronica waved her arms, her rage building. I want him arrested. For destruction of property. For harassment. Ma'am, he hired a company to remove a vehicle that was illegally parked on his private property. You can pursue this in civil court. The officers wrote down their report, a bizarre and likely unprecedented log entry. After advising Veronica to consult with a lawyer, they left, their sirens wailing once more as they drove away, leaving behind a scene of utter destruction. Alex stood alone, staring at the watery grave he had created. The water was no longer blue. A murky, rainbow sheen of oil and gasoline was spreading across the surface. The pool cleaner, a small, disc-shaped robot, had stopped its dutiful work, now floating idly near the car's submerged roof. The custom-built gate, the reason for this whole ordeal, stood open, but the truck was still in the way. It was a Pyrrhic victory. He had won the battle, but the war, he realized, was just beg. The papers in Alex's hand felt heavier than the submerged car. He stared at the names printed neatly on the official court documents, Julian Vance and Helen Vance. The last name wasn't Hayes. It was the lawyer's. And Veronica was his daughter. A family of legal sharks, it seemed, had just moved in next door. The universe, in its infinite sense of irony, had given him a middle finger that was even bigger than the one he had given his neighbor. He stood there, frozen, as the town car pulled away, leaving behind a silence more deafening than the crane's engine. Veronica, now composed and armed with the power of her family's wrath, followed her parents inside, casting one last, cold glance at Alex. The message was clear. This was no longer a dispute between neighbors. This was a vendetta. The sun was setting, casting long, menacing shadows across his backyard. The once gleaming pool, his personal sanctuary, was now a toxic, oily swamp. The car, submerged and silent, looked less like a monument to his victory and more like a tombstone for his financial stability. He went inside, the legal papers still clutched in his hand, and sat heavily on the couch. The phone was a dead weight in his hand, but he knew he had to make another call. He couldn't fight this alone. He needed a lawyer of his own, someone who could navigate the legal minefield he had just waltzed into. He found a name in his phone book, a friend of a friend who had a reputation for being a bulldog in civil litigation. The lawyer, a man named Mark, listened patiently and with growing astonishment as Alex recounted the entire story. Let me get this straight, Mark said, his voice a low rumble over the phone. You paid a crane company $10,000 to drop a neighbor's car in your pool because she was blocking your gate, and now her father, a high-powered lawyer, is suing you. Yes, Alex said, the single word feeling like a confession. There was a long pause. Alex, what you did, it was a nuclear option. You bypassed every reasonable and logical step. You let your emotions drive the bus right off a cliff. The law may be on your side regarding her initial trespass, but the optics are a nightmare. I can't even begin to imagine how we spin this to a jury. My client, in a moment of extreme frustration, committed a cinematic act of vengeance. It's not going to fly. So what do I do? Alex asked, his voice laced with a desperate edge. We fight, Mark said, his voice hardening. This Julian Vance, I know his firm. They don't mess around. They're going to come at you with everything they have. This isn't just about the money for them. It's about a statement. This is a power play. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings and phone calls. Alex felt like he was drowning in paperwork. The lawsuit was filed, and the demands were astronomical. Not only was Veronica suing for the full value of the Mercedes, but she was also suing for emotional distress, loss of use, and a laundry list of other punitive damages. Julian Vance had also filed an additional claim for trespassing, claiming Alex had illegally entered his property when he initially knocked on the door. It was a flimsy claim, but it showed the kind of scorched earth tactics they were prepared to use. The restraining order was even more draconian. It prevented him from coming within 500 feet of Veronica or her home. It essentially made him a prisoner in his own house, unable to even step outside to his own backyard without violating it. The crane was still there, the truck unable to move until the pool service could come and remove the car. It sat there for 3 more days, a monument to Alex's folly, a permanent reminder to the entire neighborhood of his rash decision. Neighbors he once waved to now crossed the street to avoid him. They would stop and stare, pointing, their whispers a constant, low buzz of judgment. Alex became a pariah. Julian Vance's plan was more than just legal. It was psychological. On Wednesday morning, 2 large men, their faces grim and their expressions unyielding, began to stand at the edge of the Hayes property. They were not aggressive. They simply stood there, in plain sight, with their arms crossed. Alex's lawyer explained that they were private security. A legal, but chilling, show of force. Their presence made it impossible for him to feel safe in his own home. He felt like he was being watched, every single one of his movements scrutinized, a living exhibit in a zoo. The pool company finally arrived to begin the draining process. They brought in a specialized submersible crane, a smaller, more nimble piece of equipment designed for delicate removals. The men worked in silence, their faces grim, a look of professional bewilderment on their faces. As the water level dropped, the car's mangled form was revealed in all its grotesque detail. The windows were shattered, the paint was scratched and dented, and the interior was a sodden knee. The office building, once a second home, now felt like a foreign country. Alex walked out into the midday sun, the administrative leave letter in his hand. The words, effective immediately, echoed in his mind, each one a hammer blow to his sense of stability. He felt a profound, disorienting emptiness. His job was more than a paycheck. It was his identity, his purpose. And in a single, gut-wrenching moment, a family he had known for less than a month had stolen it from him. He got into his car and drove home, the city streets blurring in a haze of anger and disbelief. He saw Julian Vance's face on every billboard, heard his smug voice on every radio advertisement. The man was a ghost, a puppeteer pulling strings he couldn't see. When he arrived home, the private security guards were still there, 2 silent, unblinking statues at the edge of his property line. They watched him get out of his car, their eyes following his every move. He felt like an animal in a cage, his home a prison. The restraining order was a lock, and the guards were the jailers. It was a suffocating, dehumanizing tactic, and it was working. He went inside and immediately called his lawyer, Mark. They did it, Alex said, his voice flat. Julian Vance signed a letter of termination for my company's biggest client. They put me on administrative leave. I'm effectively fired. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Alex could almost hear Mark processing the new information, the sheer audacity of Julian's move. "He's not just suing you, Alex," Mark finally said, his voice grave. "He's trying to ruin you. This is a classic scorched earth tactic. They're trying to financially cripple you so you can't afford to fight back. They want you to capitulate, to beg for a settlement. This isn't about the car anymore. This is about power. This is about showing the entire world what happens when someone crosses a Vance." The words hung in the air, heavy and true. Alex was in a war he had no idea he was a part of. He had no army, no allies, and his enemy had just proven they would fight dirty. "So what do we do?" Alex asked, the desperation seeping into his voice. "I can't just sit here and let them take everything from me. I have nothing left to lose." "Exactly," Mark said, his voice hardening. "You have nothing left to lose. And that makes you dangerous. We can't beat them on the legal merits of the car. The optics are terrible, and Julian knows it. But we can't play their game. We have to play our own." Alex's mind, trained in the cold logic of project management, began to turn. "What do you mean?" "We don't fight the lawsuit," Mark said. "We go after the source. We go after Julian Vance himself. He's a lawyer, right? And he just filed a lawsuit based on fabricated evidence to get you fired. That's a massive ethical violation. It's defamation. It's tortious interference. It's a whole new lawsuit. But we can't file it unless we have proof. We need to find a weakness in his armor. Every man has one. Julian Vance is no exception. We need to find something in his past, something he's trying to hide, and we need to use it as leverage." A new purpose ignited in Alex. This was a challenge he understood. This was a problem he could solve. He didn't have the money or the legal clout of Julian Vance, but he had something else. A singular, focused determination. He had the ability to go off the grid and find the one thing no one else could. He could hunt. He hung up the phone and got to work. He opened his laptop, the familiar glow of the screen a comfort in the suffocating silence of his house. He began with what little he knew: Julian Vance, lawyer, senior partner at a prestigious firm. He dug into the firm's history, their public records, any news articles, any stories he could find. He looked for a pattern. He looked for a past lawsuit, a settlement, a dismissal, anything that looked out of the ordinary. He started with the most obvious search terms: Julian Vance legal malpractice, Julian Vance ethics violation, Julian Vance lawsuit. The results were clean, polished, and professional. The man was a ghost, a perfect legal entity with no past. But Alex was an expert at reading between the lines. He knew that the absence of a negative story was often a story in itself. He switched tactics. He went through the firm's list of former clients, cross-referencing their names with news archives, small-town newspapers, and legal forums. He worked through the night, fueled by coffee and a burning desire for retribution. Then, just as the sun began to rise, a small, faded article from a local newspaper in another state caught his eye. It was from 5 years ago. The headline was unassuming. "Local construction company fails to settle dispute, closes doors." The article was a small, 3-paragraph piece buried deep in the business section. It detailed a lawsuit between the local construction company and a much larger, more powerful few. The two men in black suits eventually left. The silence they left behind was not peaceful. It was a vacuum, a void filled with the chilling certainty of what had just happened. Alex walked to the window and watched their car disappear down the street. The doorbell was still a phantom chime in his mind, the ghost of a triumphant song. They hadn't come to hurt him physically. They had come to break him financially, to show him that Julian Vance's reach was long and his methods were merciless. He was now a man with no job, no money, and a house he couldn't sell or even borrow against. He was, for all intents and purposes, a dead man walking. But he was also a man with nothing left to lose. And in that moment, a quiet, cold resolve settled over him, pushing out the panic. The game had changed. He wasn't playing defense anymore. He was going on the offensive. He had a target, a weakness, and a singular focus. The project manager in him, the part of his brain that thrived on solving complex problems, took over. Julian Vance was no longer a neighbor or a legal adversary. He was a puzzle to be solved. He called Mark, his voice a calm, focused monotone. "I'm going to find them," he said. "The construction company from the article. I'm going to find the people Julian Vance did this to before. Alex, are you insane? You're broke. You have a restraining order. They'll have a dozen men watching your every move. It's a trap." "No," Alex said. "It's a pilgrimage. They expect me to be cowering in my house, hiring lawyers to fight a battle I can't win. They expect me to be defeated. They don't expect me to go hunting." He hung up the phone before Mark could protest further. He went to his study, a room once filled with blueprints and project plans, and pulled out a worn-out backpack. He packed a change of clothes, his laptop, and the last $100 he had in cash. His credit cards were useless, his accounts frozen. He was traveling like a ghost, a specter of his former life. He left his car in the garage, knowing it would be a flashing beacon for Julian Vance's men. He couldn't risk being followed. He was going to disappear. He walked out of the house, the private security guards still standing sentinel by his driveway. Their faces were impassive, but he could feel their gazes on his back. He walked down the street, then turned left and walked another half-mile to the bus stop. He was an anonymous figure in the suburban landscape, a man with a backpack, his purpose invisible to the world. He got on the bus, his last few dollars paying for a ticket that took him to the outskirts of the city. From there, he hitchhiked. It was a humiliating, desperate act, but it was his only option. He was no longer a man of means. He was a man of the road. He made his way across the state, his face grim, his mind a steel trap. He ate what little he could afford at gas station convenience stores, and slept in bus terminals, his backpack a makeshift pillow. The journey took him 3 days. He finally arrived in the small, sleepy town that had been the backdrop for Julian Vance's last act of professional cruelty. The town was a place that time had forgotten. It was filled with old, faded storefronts and quiet, tree-lined streets. The address from the article led him to a small, 2-story house on the edge of town. The front yard was overgrown, the paint on the house peeling. There was a rusted old pickup truck in the driveway, its tires flat and its engine long since dead. It was a monument to a life that had been destroyed. He walked up the driveway, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He knocked on the door. It took a moment, but he heard a shuffling sound from inside. The door opened a crack, and an old woman with tired eyes and a face etched with a lifetime of hard work looked at him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice weary. "My name is Alex Hayes," he said. "I'm looking for the owner of a construction company, a family business. From 5 years ago." The woman's eyes, once just tired, now filled with a deep, bottomless suspicion. "They're not here," she said, and she began to close the door. "Wait," Alex said, putting his hand on the door, not to stop her, but to show his sincerity. "Please, I'm not with anyone. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a victim. Just like you." He saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. "A victim of what?" "A victim of Julian Vance," he said. "He bankrupted you 5 years ago. He bankrupted me this week." He saw the shock on her face, the raw pain of a memory she had tried to bury. She looked at him for a long moment, then slowly, she opened the door. He walked inside. The house was clean, but smelled of old books and dust. An older man with a long, graying beard and a gaunt face was sitting in a wheelchair by the window. He looked up at Alex, his eyes cold and wary. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a rasp. Alex explained everything, from the moment Veronica had parked. The worn manila folder felt like a briefcase full of diamonds. It was light, but the weight of what it represented, a small family's ruined life, a powerful lawyer's darkest secret, made Alex's arm feel heavy. He thanked the old couple, their eyes now holding a flicker of something close to hope, and walked back into the sleepy, forgotten town. The world, which had seemed so bleak just hours before, was now filled with a new, terrifying clarity. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was a man with a plan, a mission, and a weapon. The journey back was a different kind of endurance test. The hitchhiking felt less desperate and more like an infiltration. He paid close attention to every car that passed him, every face that looked out a window. He saw ghosts of the men in black suits in every passing sedan, every tinted window. He was a professional now, a man on the run, and his paranoia was no longer a weakness. It was a skill. He took a different route back, avoiding the main highways, opting for smaller state roads that wound through farmland and forgotten towns. The trip took longer, but it felt safer. He was a phantom, a whisper of a man. He arrived back in his neighborhood under the cover of night, a bag of gas station food in his hand. He walked the perimeter of his property, staying in the shadows of the trees. The private security guards were still there, two statues in the faint glow of the streetlights. They were a constant reminder of Julian's power, but now they felt less like a threat and more like a signpost. They were a testament to the fact that he was doing something right. He found a weak spot in the back of his fence, a panel that was loose. He squeezed through, feeling the triumphant rush of a successful infiltration. He was in his own house again, a stranger in his own home. The next morning, he called Mark, his lawyer, and asked him to come over. "Are you out of your mind? You're a liability, Alex. And you're just inviting a witness to your restraining order violation. I'm in my backyard, Mark. I haven't crossed the property line. And I'm not a liability anymore. I'm a solution. Just come." Mark arrived an hour later, looking tired and stressed. He found Alex sitting at his kitchen table, a laptop open, and the manila folder sitting in front of him. The side of the folder seemed to drain the last bit of color from Mark's face. He looked at Alex, not with pity, but with an expression of stunned disbelief. "Alex, what have you done?" Mark asked, his voice low and cautious. Alex didn't answer. He just slid the folder across the table. "Read it," he said. Mark opened the folder, his professional caution warring with his curiosity. He pulled out the structural engineer's report. As he read the pages, his face went through a series of rapid changes, from confusion to professional interest, then to a dawning, stunned realization. He looked up at Alex, his eyes wide. This is a full structural analysis of the gate," he stammered. "It proves it was a structural defect, not damage. He lied. Julian Vance fabricated the claim." "He didn't just fabricate the claim, Mark," Alex said, his voice a low, hard rumble. "He used it to bankrupt a family. This isn't a one-off. This is a pattern. He's a professional predator. He finds a weakness, and he uses the legal system to ruin people who can't fight back." Mark closed the folder and sat back in his chair, a long, low whistle escaping his lips. "My God, Alex. This is a smoking gun. This is legal malpractice. It's defamation. It's a violation of his professional ethics. This is the one thing he couldn't have a team of lawyers buried because it was dismissed, and the family couldn't afford a fight. You didn't just find a ghost, Alex. You found his original sin. For the first time since this nightmare began, Mark looked at Alex with a glimmer of professional admiration. What do we do? Mark asked, his voice already shifting into strategy mode. We can file a civil suit. We can file a complaint with the Bar Association. He'll be disbarred. He'll lose his license. No, Alex said. We don't do any of that. Mark stared at him, confused. What do you mean we don't? This is our golden ticket. This is our checkmate. Think about it, Mark, Alex said, leaning forward. He'll bury it. He has a team of people to make things disappear. He'll claim the report is falsified. He'll claim we're fabricating evidence. He'll claim we're trying to extort him. He's already demonstrated he's willing to go to any length to win. He'll tie us up in court for years. We'll spend every last cent we have, and he'll just smile as he watches us burn. We'll win on paper, and he'll win in reality. We can't beat him in court. We have to beat him on the street. Mark was silent for a long moment, considering the logic. So what's the plan, then? He asked. Alex looked him dead in the eye, a cold, hard glint in his gaze. We don't file a lawsuit. We send a message.